In this video, I'm going to show you how I made this epic night scene where this cyber samurai has a face-off with a demon who is perhaps destroying everything by causing this massive forest fire. Yeah, something like that. Now before you go and comment, this is not supposed to be a step-by-step tutorial, but more of a breakdown of how I came up with the idea and created the scene, my thought process behind certain artistic decisions, and I'll also be going over some of the technical details that are going to be very handy to you if you ever decide to create something similar. So I'm going to be pretty quick with my explanations. The Blender project file and the Photoshop file will also be available on my Gumroad page with everything set up, the only exception being the close-up trees, which are paid products, so I'm not allowed to redistribute them in any way. I'll just replace them with CC0 models that you can use in your own scenes. I'll also be linking every asset that I use in this video in the description in case you want to recreate this scene one-to-one. With that said, let's get into it. So the way this project started was when I was scrolling through Pinterest and then I saw this really cool image of a samurai in the woods. So I took it as an inspiration and looked up more artwork on Pinterest and ArtStation of duel samurai fights and collected these references. Since I've already got a basic idea of what the scene is going to be about, I dived straight into it without any other plan, thinking that I'd just improvise as I go. The first step for me was to get the characters into the project so that I can set up the camera angle right away and avoid any unnecessary work later. I used the Sketchfab Blender add-on, which lets you directly import models from Sketchfab by simply searching for what you need or pasting a link. So you don't have to manually download and set up everything, it just does it all for you. I roughly set up where I wanted the characters to be in the frame using the golden triangle composition guide in the camera's viewport display settings. I decided to quickly rig the demon character because I wanted to pose her a certain way. I was happy with the samurai pose, so I didn't think it needed any more work. I added a rigify rig, deleted all of the bones that I did not need, rotated the bones to match the character's existing pose, and then parented the character model to this rig by using automatic weights. This automatically assigns the nearby vertices to each bone, reducing the amount of work that you need to do in the weight painting stage. I still had to clean it up a bit as it had some errors, mainly because of the funky shape and pose the character was already in. Ideally, you want your characters to be in an A pose or T pose while rigging them. I also added some bones to this rig which followed the shape of the wings and then parented the wings object to this armature, again using automatic weights, and now I was able to change the pose of the character. It's a very messy weight paint, but it'll get the job done since we aren't animating this character. That's what I think is very important to realize, that you don't need to make everything perfect, but instead focus on building them to an extent that your specific project requires you to. I think it is also important for you to realize that you need to hit that subscribe button. Next comes the actual scene, and I just used a plane to set up the ground, which won't be visible anyway, and I played around with some cubes to see how I wanted the background mountains to look like in the most simplified form. Then using ANT landscape add-on that comes shipped with Blender, I created some basic mountains to add to the background. This is way faster than sculpting them manually, perfect for some background elements. I felt like doing the lighting next. I think it's a good idea to do it before any of the material side of things, because then you can get a better idea of where the focus is going to be and which are the parts where you can slack off. I tried using a few HDRIs, but I wasn't really feeling any of them, for the lack of a better term. In the end, I just decided to make the sky and the lighting from the HDRI separate, so I imported a free image from Pexels that I thought had a cool looking sky, just put it behind the whole scene, and then I used a different HDRI to create the environment lighting. You can also use this node setup to make the HDRI disappear from the render while still keeping all of its lighting. I created a cube with a volumetric shader on it to create something like fog for now, just to see how it would look. I added some area lights to fake some extra lighting and create this rim lighting around the character. It's temporary, we'll just refine it later down the road, hopefully. I wanted some trees to fill the background with, and you must know by now that I like to make things quick. And this was 4 days before my exam, so I was all about speed. I downloaded these transparent images of trees and mountains, brought them into Blender, slapped them at the back, and scaled them randomly. It's not looking great, and that's because we need to add some textures to the mountain models, and so I did, and now it's perfect. Blends in pretty well and nobody can tell what's actually going on. Still way too dark, so we need to add more lights. But first I decided to make the fog gets thick as it gets fat effect using a gradient texture oriented correctly using a mapping node, and the fall off control using a color ramp. We use this to control the density, so the lighter or wider values will give us values closer to 1 and the darker closer to 0. That way we get our desired effect. I also created a long plane and used a similar technique to drive the emission and alpha inputs off of principal shader to create these fog cards and place them behind each mountain to fake a lot of distance and atmosphere. One thing that the scene desperately needs is some trees and vegetation, and one thing I desperately need is for you to hit the subscribe button. So that's what I added next. using the super high quality assets from Botanique. It is a paid add-on, but you'll be able to find decent looking tree models for free on sites like Sketchfab and BlendSwap. In fact, that's how I used to create my older scenes that needed trees and stuff if I did not have the time to create them myself. And of course, there's always the option to learn and create them yourself, either from scratch or using free add-ons. But I gotta say, it's such a lifesaver to have an add-on like Botanique. I'll leave a link in the description if you want to check it out. You can also get this whole project on my Gumroad page, the link to which will also be in the description. Now coming back to the lighting, I was getting this weird shade of blue in the render which was coming off from the HDRI after I tried to alter its colors to fit the mood better. So I used a gradient texture again to mask out the entire bottom half of the world and made it black so that it does not emit any light. I was struggling with the lighting in this scene because I could not imagine any other light source other than the sun that could add a significant amount of light to the scene while still being logical, if that makes sense. And then it hit me. Fire. Forest fire. So how do you create a forest fire? You already know how I'm gonna do it. That's right, a bunch of fire images that we put everywhere and add orange lighting wherever we need, and it would still make 100% sense because it's a forest fire. Now we can get really creative with the lighting and add some highlights to clarify the subjects on both sides, because we can explain this side as the light coming from the fire and this side as the light coming from the moon. We can also add some lights inside the volume in the frame without the volume dispersing the light by simply turning off volume scatter under the ray visibility in object properties. This will allow us to add fake lights anywhere to create our desired effect. The scene was coming together and now it was time to fix some issues. The main issue was the pose of the demon girl, which was kind of stiff, and so I needed to make it look like she was flying from the left to the right as if she was heading to the other side of the forest to destroy it, and she encounters the samurai on her way. Once the little tweaks are done, it was time to render it out and bring it into Photoshop, where I did further refining to bring more life into the render. This meant adjusting the colors, adding some extra glow, ember, smoke, dust, some magical particles because they look cool, birds flying to find shelter, adding some details to the trunk of the tree, vignetting the edges, and adding some details to the sky at this part because it looked kinda bland. I also added these cool flares to the eyes of the demon and added some chromatic aberration to certain parts to add to the supernatural vibe of the scene in addition to the realism. I also made a duplicate of the original color corrected image and added some motion blur to it, made a mask, and painted near the demon at certain parts to make it more apparent that she is in motion. And that's all I did to create this scene. Now behold the final result.